for just a little bit of the beginning of what I'll be doing. That way I can also share it with my church family at Peter's Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. And my church family also sends their warmest regards and sends their love to you as well. And so what I want to do, much rather than to cover a lot of things today, I just want to cover one thing and to go deep into one thing, much rather than to touch upon numerous things. And then as questions begin to arise, then from there we'll kind of move around to other topics that are relevant to what you need and whatever's most pressing. But one thing that we will all have to do in some shape, form, or fashion, whether from a pulpit or elsewhere, we will have to preach in some shape, form, or fashion. The best preaching should occur when someone does not even know that they're hearing the sermon. St. Francis of Assisi famously said, "Preach the gospel at all times. Use words if necessary." Meaning that we live in such a way that we're living out the sermon, and that people, I've often said, if you have to tell someone you're a Christian, then that's a problem. If you live a certain way, at some point something will happen in which individuals will ask you, they'll be typically very polite about it and say, "If you don't mind my asking, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God?" Because they will see something about the way you live. Yeah. And so I've often said, whenever I meet people in general who will stress to me that they're a Christian, I'm saying, "I appreciate what you're saying, but just give me some time, and I'll know one way or the other pretty soon." And so in that sense, what I want to provide for you is a preaching technique that can also be applied to teaching. It can be applied to lesson plans. It can be applied to a number of dimensions of ministry. Now, in terms of preaching, there are traditionally three approaches. There's the approach that we're going to focus on the most today, which is called correlation. There is dialectical. And then there is application. There are other forms of preaching that are subcategories of these, such as expository preaching and so forth. But these are the three umbrellas, so to speak. Eulogies would not fall under any of these three. So eulogies are a completely different approach. From the Latin word eulogia, meaning to flatter. Meaning the purpose of the eulogy is to focus on the best parts of someone's life. We all know how most people have lived before they pass, and so some things don't need to be said because we know those things. Instead, we focus on what was wonderful about the person's life, what people remember, and then from there we transition to encouraging the family as they go through bereavement, and then ultimately to remind people that God is not only the God of life here, but the God of life eternal. But for standard approaches, what I call, if you find yourself with what's called a Saturday night special situation, meaning you had 6 days to get ready. But as we know, as Dr. Cleophas J. LaRue says, Sundays come faster than sermons. And so you had 6 days. But then all of a sudden, there was something that came up that you didn't know you had to do, and so now 1 day is gone. Okay, now you have 5 days. But you didn't finish up completely with the thing from before, so now you have to finish that up, and now here comes something else. Okay, now you got 3 days. Okay, now you get another call that you didn't know that you had. Now you only have about 2 days left. Now it's about 1 day. Now you find yourself on Saturday night saying, "I got to preach tomorrow, and I'm trying to find something." And I assure you, the closer you get to the moment of preaching, the more Satan is going to attack you in the most unexpected ways. The good part about that is, if Satan's not attacking you, then you're doing something wrong. So if Satan is attacking you, I will say then the good news is you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. Right. But at the same time, we also want to know how to fight off the attack of the enemy. Yes. And so of all of these three methods, while they are all excellent methods, Dr. King most notably would often use dialectical and application because of his mentor, Samuel DeWitt Proctor. And we'll touch lightly upon dialectical for maybe all of 1 minute this afternoon, but I just want to focus mainly on correlation, because correlation most quickly allows you to put something together from scratch. Now, certainly I know that we all keep our files, I call it a stable, and we say, well, this horse rode good a couple of weeks ago. I guess I'll put a saddle back on and ride it one more time. But think of correlation as a garden from which you can always pick something and prepare quickly in the kitchen. And typically we know that when you have a garden, what you do is every so often you pick something from it and you prepare it, so that way when you need to go ahead and fix something, it's ready. So what we're going to do is focus on how to start creating a garden. So when we see this word correlation, what do we immediately see in here? When we correlate something, we're doing what? So we're taking two things and we're relating them. So the main thing with correlation is it has a few simple components, and here's the first. The first is called the condition of existence. In other words, there's a German term for this called Sitz im Leben, which means the situation in life. Where are people in their lives? So, as ministers, we are first and foremost physicians of the soul. When we go to the doctor and something's wrong, what's the first thing the doctor will ask us?
What are our symptoms?
Symptoms? And typically we fill out what? History. So that way we understand. So this is a matter of knowing what are the symptoms of the people. For as much as we can gain, what's the history? What is the situation? So the same text can be preached in 5 different places, but it has to be preached in 5 different ways, because there's 5 different sets of symptoms, 5 different histories, 5 different situations. I'm sure you've heard the expression, oh, the pastor was talking to me today. What people are saying is, my situation, my symptoms, my condition was identified. And so even before we choose a text, we don't choose the text, the situation in which the people are living chooses the text. The reason that we read our Bible is so that we are familiar with the prescription book, so we know what prescription to apply to the condition. So that's why when we read Ecclesiastes 12, for instance, and it says, much study is weariness to the flesh. Of the making of many books there is no end. In other words, you should always be working on a sermon. I'm always in my phone. The moment the Spirit gives me something, I will text myself. And I have a whole notebook. So you see I have this notebook. I have notebooks at home where I know I will never live long enough to preach everything that the Lord has given me. But the conditions are always there. So I say, if I ever have to encounter this condition, let me go to this text where I have identified a text that addresses that condition. So the condition of existence. Once we know that condition, the second component then is called the organizing observation. So let's say if you're sitting down with a notebook and you're starting to work on a sermon, the first thing you want to do before you open up your Bible is to consider, to whom am I preaching? What's their condition? The organizing observation is a general statement about that condition. It's a general statement. What I mean by general is this. It should be something with which no one can disagree. It should be something that an atheist who does not want to hear your sermon still can't disagree with what you say. So this might sound counterintuitive, but there is a strategy here, which means your organizing observation should never mention God or the Bible or Jesus. The very first sentence should never mention that. Why? What if somebody doesn't believe in God? They've already tuned out. What if they're church hurt, or they've been through a church war? They immediately say, then this is not for me. However, if that person is church hurt, and we know that's their symptom, the organizing observation, for instance, here's an example of one. For someone who's church hurt, you would say, there are times when, no matter how much we give of ourselves in a community, sometimes we still find ourselves hurt. No one can disagree with that. An atheist cannot disagree with that. Somewhere there's an atheist who doesn't believe in God, who has still been hurt after giving their heart in a relationship or in a community. They can't disagree with it. When Jesus preached to people, he always started off general. with something that would cause people to have to say, well, I agree with that. That first sentence should be something that no one can disagree with. Let's say if the symptom is someone has been in an abusive relationship. And abuse can take many different forms. It can be verbal, it can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be economic. Abuse can take many forms. An organizing observation would be, and this is the formula for it, you can say there are times when. There are times when, despite being in a relationship, there is no love. See, a relationship simply means everything has a relationship to one another. A relationship just means that something is in one place and something else is in another. It could be a distant relationship, a bad relationship, it could be contentious. A relationship does not mean relatedness. Relatedness means that there's a sameness, that there's an understanding, there's a compassion, there's a consideration. Many relationships can be terrible relationships. It doesn't mean they're good. Relatedness is what we hope for. God has a relationship to Satan. They're enemies. We have a relationship with Satan. We're enemies. We have relatedness with God because we have the sameness of heart. We desire what God desires. So while I often say, I know that we use the word relationship and to say, I want to have a relationship with God. Well, that's a good place to start, but what we want is relatedness with God, to be the other side of the coin. A coin is one coin, but it has two sides. Because it's still the same coin. That's relatedness. A relationship is two different coins. They could be both quarters. So they have a relationship. But they're not one and the same. What God desires with us is for us to be one and the same. And so there are times when someone provide for me a symptom. What's a symptom? What's a condition of existence? Something that people go through in life. Substance abuse. In general, why do we feel that people use substances? So in other words, they're medicating, self-medicating. There's something that's so painful that they want to numb, they want to avoid, they want to evade that pain. There are times when we experience things that we cannot even put into words. And we seek not only someone, but something to help us get through. You can already see how, without mentioning God or Jesus, how we're going to already start moving in the sermon. Because we know who the someone is. We know what the something is. But we start off with, there are times when this condition occurs. Over time, you'll reword this in different ways. But the formula is, it starts with, there are times when. The other half of this is, there are times when, insert condition, when this happens. When this happens, then we should. Now, have you noticed the we's here? Because we're including ourselves in the human story. There was once a story of a preacher who would preach to a village of lepers. And every Sunday he would say, you lepers should do this, and you lepers should do that. And the lepers would listen, and then they would go away. No one would come forth to be baptized. Nobody had their life changed. One day after the preacher finished preaching his regular sermon, you lepers should do this, and you lepers should do that, he went home. He ran a hot bath, and when he put his feet in the water, despite the water being hot, he couldn't feel the water, which is the first sign of leprosy. The nerve endings died. And then in the following days, he could no longer feel anything, and he realized he was now a leper. And he had to go and live with the lepers. As he moved to the village that following week, and as he began his sermon, as he had so many other times before, there was one difference. He said, we lepers. And from that moment, the people came forward. People must understand that we too, in ministry, not only are going through what they're going through, but without telling them that we've been through just as much. They must understand that we've been through just as much and more, which is why God has called us to be where we are. See, the world would say that you have to heal your wounds before you start healing. Ministry is God empowers us to heal while we're wounded. As we know, there's that famous book, The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen. In other words, why would Jesus, upon his return, still have the nail prints in his hand? It is to remind us that unlike the world that says you must have the illusion of perfection, God says, no, your scars are the source of the power. The enemy will do anything to try to get people to run away from their scars, when our scars are the sign of this is where the strength comes from. So, there are times when this happens, then we. So, going back to some of the conditions we identified, let's say, again, substance abuse. There are times when we experience things that are so painful that we seek to find something or someone that will help us to deal with the pain. When this happens, when we experience things that are so painful that we seek something or someone to try to help us to deal with the pain, then we should understand that our pain is not a weakness, and that through our pain we can have strength and be healed through it, not by seeking to suppress it. That then leads us to a text. And this is where you should always be keeping a notebook of simply reading one verse or a pericope, what we call a pericope. A pericope is another word for a passage of Scripture. That we're always looking for a pericope that addresses that condition. Because then your next sentence is, in this text, we find how we may address this situation. Within 1 minute, you have addressed what people are going through. You've told them how they can deal with it, and now we're going to look in God's Word so that we can apply that to the condition. And so from that point, now we're in the text. So again, condition, organizing, observation. Can I erase this, or would anyone like to take a picture of it, or to, because sometimes I do that as well. I say if you would like to with your phone to take a picture, and that way you can also have it. And then we'll move on to the final component. So as I mentioned, there are just 3 simple components in correlation: condition of existence, organizing, observation. Now, the condition of existence need not always be a negative experience. Let's say if you're doing a high school graduation, then that condition can be, there are times when we go through a lot and we reach a day of achievement. So it's whatever the condition is. Now, your question may be, well, Pastor Browns, what if we don't know their condition? So, because we're ministers, I won't call it a cheat code. So I'll just say there's a code for that. When in doubt, there are always 3 conditions to which you can preach, and you just choose one: faith, love, or hope. The 3 things people always need. So if you don't know all of these details, then you preach on love, or you preach on hope, or you preach on faith. So you can always start just working out, organizing observations for love, faith, and hope. All right, so now moving on to the final component. You may have noticed from the beginning I said when we construct our organizing observation, at that point we neither mention God, Jesus, nor the Bible in that opening sentence. That is because we are moving the listener. We are introducing the listener to Jesus. A sermon is a house. And I'm old school, so I'm sure we all remember how most houses used to have a porch, a front porch. Now, what if a porch is 50 feet long? Would you want to go into that house if you have to walk on a 50-foot porch to get into the house? What if a porch is only 5 inches long? That's not much of a porch, so you'd almost have to jump to get into the front door. So the first 2 minutes of the sermon should be just like that. Long enough that people have a place to stand. Not so long that they forget that they're even going into a house, but also not so short that they can't get into the house. So that's what the organizing observation is. It's the front porch of the house. And then that sentence in which you transition to the text, that's giving them somewhere to hang their coat. Now, because it is a house, as you start preaching, that house is on fire. Which means you got about 20 to 25 minutes to wrap up that sermon before that house burns down on you. Because I assure you this, after about 30 minutes, and typically by an hour 15,